off, we're going to just give you a brief overview of what I want to cover tonight. Talking about just sort of setting the stage for adolescence. I'm sure if you're here tonight you have some familiarity with an adolescent or many adolescents, and you've got some questions burning in your head, and that's great. So I hope we can have some discussion around that. There's the four sort of main areas that I'd like to cover today around thinking about how you find balance when you're working with your adolescent and some of the challenges that come along the way. And then we'll move on to some questions and wrap up. So, first is an exercise for you in thinking about what it was like to be a teenager. I want you really to actually take some time now and think about what it was for you to be a teenager. What were you like? What were you interested in? What were the things that you cared about? So have you got that image in your head? Really and truly now. So here's the first question. What was important to me when I was a teen? I'm not going to ask from the crowd. It's okay. You can see people starting to avert their eyes, which is an adolescent behavior, by the way. What did I wish my parents understood about me? And that's a lot of what we'll be talking about tonight. What did I want them to know about me? What was important to you? A clean room, borrowing the car, going out with friends, the phone, music, the mall. And then those are kind of the things that we tend to throw around as sort of the adolescent kind of like things. When I was preparing for this, I was certainly thinking about how do we think about adolescence? And when you start to look at books that are available on adolescence, when you read the newspaper on adolescence, there tends to be a real pathologizing about adolescence. These adolescents that are out of control, that there's nothing going on right for them, and we can kind of pigeonhole adolescence into sort of a not so friendly box sometimes. So I want you to stretch your imaginations a little bit. Think about, did you want your parents to listen to you? Did you want to feel like they really understood you? Did you want them to sort of say to you, yeah, you've got something worthwhile to say and I'm interested in hearing what you've got to say? And feeling respected. The youth that I work with in a residential setting, I asked them what did they want their parents to know, and it really, a lot of them came back to saying, I really wish my parents listened to me, I really wish they understood me, and I really wish they took the time to understand what it's like to be an adolescent. That they also have preconceived ideas about parents and adults, thinking that they already know what adolescents are like, so we already know that. And that kind of really cuts down that just dialogue. So I want to open our imaginations tonight for a little bit more dialogue. So ask yourself, what is important to your teen? Now that you've thought about what was it like for me to be a teenager, what was important to me when I was a teenager, what do you think is important to your teen or the teens that you work with? I've included a variety of pictures there because I think that it's important to think about teens as a diverse group, that what matters to one teen may not necessarily matter to the other, and thinking about it in a much broader perspective. One of the things there, this is sort of just a commentary on what we think about happy faces and what a teen might think about a happy face. So just that breaking down the dialogue and thinking about things in a different kinds of way, and that their perspective is quite different from ours, and they're faced with technology in a way that we were never exposed to. So let's just jump right into trying to balance all this stuff. Adolescence is the time of contradictions, and in my head I think of it as the teeter-totter, balancing the risk-taking with the safety, the doubt, the confidence, acceptance, individuality, responsibility, structure. These are themes that are going to come back and forth, and I encourage you to think about these ideas as being on a continuum. So these temperament ideas, where do they fit? Risk-taking versus safety. Doubt versus confidence, acceptance versus individuality, responsibility versus structure. Okay, temperament, thinking about personality, their style, the way they operate in the world. These are different ideas to think about. And I want you to think about these ideas as being on a continuum. So an individual isn't all about risk-taking. They're not all stuck at one end. There may be a lot of risk-taking, but there's also a dimension that goes the other way towards safety. So thinking about how they shift on that dimension. How do they shift in terms of doubt and confidence? When are they feeling pretty good about themselves and what their abilities are? And when are they questioning what they're all about? Acceptance and individuality. I think this is often one that gets overemphasized in some ways, that it's very important, but we tend to sort of stigmatize youth sometimes in the way of that they're all about piercings, they're all about tattoos, they're all about funky clothes, and I think it's important to think about how on that dimension they are also seeking acceptance in so many ways that push them towards the individuality. So it's kind of this back and forward dimension. And responsibility and structure. We'll definitely come back to this a lot because I think structure is a really critically important way to parent adolescents, and it's something that we often underestimate how important it is, I think. So as we look at these 4 dimensions, I put arrows in there so that people would think about their child may end up on being different components, and where they line up in different ways is going to be interactive. So thinking about how each of those dimensions interact with each other and thinking about the dimensions along a continuum. So, the first is doubt versus confidence. How well does my teen recognize his or her limits and strengths? When does my teen feel most insecure? And when does my teen feel most confident? Have that imagination thinking in your head going on? Here's a cartoon. At your age, Tommy, a boy's body goes through changes that are not always easy to understand. So thinking about how the developmental piece is really a big part of what we're doing here in adolescence. I think sometimes we think about development as sort of the preschool, toddler, going into school, and we tend to neglect how much development is still going on into adolescence, and even more so pushing out into the 20s. And a lot of the research that we're looking at nowadays is talking about how flexible development is in terms of how much is still going on. So lots of things are on the grow, and here I say teens are like toddlers, sort of. And really, there's just so much still going on here. Brain development, cognitive development, identity, social, emotional, all those things are happening. So if you think about the adolescent brain, as I just mentioned, the brain is still developing way into the 20s. Obviously, the brain is always changing and in flux. But in terms of the developmental things that it's still acquiring, we need to think about development as moving well past the typical adolescent period that we think about in the teens and going even past that. We know a lot more about the prefrontal cortex, the front of your brain, and what that does. And I've heard people talk about how adolescents in some ways need to lease a prefrontal cortex. So it's really still growing, and there's so much changes going on that sometimes they rely on other people to be making decisions and making those kinds of judgment calls that they're not capable of doing. And in that sense, they're leasing your prefrontal cortex. In terms of cognitive development, there is tons happening here, but one thing that I think is important to think about is executive functioning. I think you're going to hear this more and more and more because we're talking a lot more about executive functioning nowadays. And that executive functioning is just the mental capacity to control and purposely apply one's own mental skills. So the thinking about thinking brain kind of piece. That's part of attention. Being able to focus on different things. The planning, the steps that you need to be able to do something. Initiating, how to start a task on your own. Then shifting from one task and moving to another situation, and then transferring that information. And then inhibition is being able to stop an action or emotion. If you think of all those 5 steps as being part of something that you have to do in order to get something done in your day, that requires a lot of organization. It requires a lot of planning, and there's a lot of steps that we sort of think automatically happen in our brain, just bang, 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 which they could. But it depends on where you are in your developmental stage. So for some teens, some of these things are much more trickier than others, and we need to think about what are the developmental things that might be getting in the way of them having success in that kind of a way. Does that make sense for everybody?
Can there be deficits in some of those areas?
Absolutely. Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. I can't overestimate it yet. Like, that's really important to think about. And you could have deficits in one area and not in another area. And so you may be looking like, oh, look at me, I'm a great planner. But when it comes to stopping my impulses, I'm right off the board, can't do it at all. So then it also can set up teens to be in a tricky situation where they look really good in one environment, and so you kind of raise your expectations for them to be able to do that across the board, and it doesn't happen in another situation. The other thing to think about is these kinds of things require that you can generalize from learning from one environment to another environment, and that's also something that developmentally comes along with time. So I think it's pretty easy for us to be overestimating how much of these things they've already accomplished when really this is something that's still very much on the grow, if we can think about it that way. Does that make sense for people? Okay. Identity development. Lots of things are happening here in terms of thinking about who am I. social life, friends, job, spiritual beliefs, religious practices, romantic relationships, physical appearance, culture, values, family, talents, all these things. These are huge things. We could do a talk on just one of those in terms of adolescence in so many ways. When you think about all these different components that are being put together into an identity, that's a big job. We as adults may be looking at those and thinking, I'm not sure how developed I am in one of those areas. So we're all at different stages. Social and emotional development. So, socially, one of the things that I was thinking about was there's this idea, and it's quite true in adolescence, that it can be a very egocentric time. What I mean by that is that if you think back to being a toddler when everything is all about me, 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 in adolescence it can kind of be like that too. Everything's me, 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 me. It's very hard to shift gears sometimes out of that, and that is also a developmental stage. So one of the things that can happen is that you're planning to go to a party, your adolescent says, oh my goodness, I don't know what I'm going to wear, I don't know what's going on with my friends, I don't know all these things, they've got all these, who's going to be there, what music are we going to listen to, I hope somebody's there that I can talk to, all that kind of stuff's going on. And then you're asking them, so what time did you want me to pick you up in the car? And that's just like, bang, they explode on that one. What do you mean you're asking me about that? That's just blah, blah, blah. I mean, in some ways, that can be just too many things for them to be balancing in their brain, and that takes some pre-planning in your head. There's just a lot going on socially for them that's important, and they're pretty stuck on where they're at. And the other thing that I think is interesting to think about, especially in this day and age, is the internet. So how is that influencing the developing identity of adolescents? As you know, so much time is spent exploring the internet, and how is that influencing their identity and what they learn about each other, and also how the speed the rate at which they are getting new information and sharing information between people is quite different from what we are used to. When we think about emotional development, there's a component of emotional expression and emotional regulation. So that's just being able to control my emotions in different kinds of ways. And when we think about regulation, we think about being able to recognize a feeling that I'm having. That in and of itself is something that we have to teach some teens. They really are not able to recognize what the feeling is that they have. Some adults cannot recognize the feeling that they have. So I'm not trying to say this is a pathological thing. I'm just saying that it requires some learning at many ways. So once you recognize the feeling, then you need to be able to put a label on it. And then understand what it's all about. And as teens move along, they're also beginning to be able to use different kinds of emotions, the conflicting emotions. How can I like one person at one point in time but not like them at another point in time? How come I go to school sometimes and everybody thinks I'm great, and other times I go and it feels like nobody likes me? So there's also this balancing act that's going on that way. How well do you think your teen is coping with all these developmental things going on? That's a lot of stuff. And what I just provided you with is a mere drop in the bucket of everything that's going on. So I want you to think about this in terms of a developmental context. What is going on with teenagers? How far can I go before mommy or daddy will stop me? This happens with toddlers climbing the stairs, right? How far can I get up there before they're going to stop me on the top? Are they going to stop me on the third step? And it kind of goes back to being an adolescent too. Where am I going? How am I going to test my limits? That's part of learning what I'm all about. But that's how far can I go? And I think some teens are more likely to push that direction and see how many steps they can get up to, if I can carry that analogy over. And others are more likely to jump to the top, whereas some are happy at the bottom and don't need to be pushing the limits at all. So again, you need to think about that as a dimensional thing. So regardless of where they are developmentally and how it's interacting, they still need boundaries. And part of the development of boundaries involves open communication. So by open communication, I mean it's a backwards and forwards conversation. It's not just a one-way kind of, here's what you're going to do, and this is when it's going to happen. Open means that there's an actual discussion happening. Clear expectations. So being clear about what is accepted in your house. What do you want to have happen? These are the basics around just setting guidelines and rules around living in your home. This is what we expect, and this is how we want you to behave around those kinds of things. And I think the other thing, if we go back to leasing a prefrontal cortex, you want to be that voice that is coming into your child's head when they're faced in a situation that you want them to be thinking about I have to make a decision here. What is it that I need to be making a decision about? And it would be nice that it's your voice that's the loop in their head, that they've heard it so many times that they don't have to think about it so much. Those expectations are there for them. Consistent limits. We talk a lot about the need for consistency when we're working with youth that are younger, so like a school age somebody, 8, 9, 10. And I think sometimes the tendency is that as adolescence comes upon you that you can back off, and you certainly can back off to some degree for some adolescents. But I think that the consistency is really important so that there's a clear message being happening. I know Joanne has often talked about a backbone and the importance of a backbone in parenting being something that's going to provide you with structure, but it can be bend and flexible. But that clear and consistent message is what kind of keeps things together, and I think it can't be underestimated how important that is. And I also have encountered teens who have said, when my parents have set limits for me, it's much easier for me to say to my friends who are asking me to do something that I personally am not comfortable with, but I'm not that totally comfortable in saying to my friends, no, I don't want to do that, to blame it on my parents. And if they blame it on their parents, it's kind of a safer thing that it's my parents' fault, not mine. But that's still one way that allows them to have some clear and consistent guidelines that they may be more comfortable doing than they are just saying no. I mean, they may come to that point, which is what you want to do, but initially the external limits can really be helpful. And just the structure, being aware where they're going, what they're doing, being involved and interested in their lives. That's very important in terms of the whole setting of boundaries. So I thought that it's kind of an interesting way to think about development for adolescents, is that they're in this big rush to reach adulthood. They want all those kinds of things that come along with it, but at the same time there's a need to pull back and still wanting to do the playing things, the friendly things, the sort of going backwards and forwards. It's a real balance that's happening that way. Responsibility versus structure. How much responsibility does your teen take for his or her actions? And how much structure does your teen need in order to succeed? This kind of pushes into parenting styles and the differences in approach. You can go from a permissive approach, which tends to be, I'm going to elaborate more later on, but more forgiving of boundary kinds of things, and highly structured, which makes sense, really consistent and all the way there. So you need to match your parenting approach with your teen's personality or temperament. So there's going to be different styles that are going to better match the personality that you're dealing with. And the other thing to think about is that I can hear sometimes from parents say, well, with my first child, I did this and this and this, and it worked perfectly. And now my second child, it doesn't work at all. Why is that? And I think it's really important for us to think about the fact that that's because your children are different. You're probably different too, but their personality that they come with really influences the match that needs to happen between the parenting approach and the personality. And something that worked once may not work again. So you need to be flexible in that kind of thing and matching up what needs to happen along the way. So, an authoritarian style parent, highly structured, setting high, consistent standards for their children, often require obedience, set clear goals for their children, and they make decisions with little reference to their child's input. So that can be one style. And that style actually matches quite well, in some ways, with a teen that could be described as being wild, one that's more pushing of the boundaries, and tends to push limits. They often need more clarity. They need structure and authority, and they often bump up against that, but it provides them with something that allows them to know where they stand, and it also helps them to contain what they're doing. This is something that we particularly recommend with teenagers that would present more with a behavioral or a conduct kind of profile, so they're really pushing of the boundaries and testing of the limits. It's not a style that may particularly work well with a child, for instance, that would be more withdrawn or shy, because there's so much structure then that they're never actually pushing their limits to test themselves out, which they need to be doing when they're more withdrawn. A permissive style parent, so that would be someone who may let their teens make more decisions. They're not being neglectful or careless, they just tend to be a little bit more loose in what they decide, how they manage things. Imagine that with a wild teen. not a very good combo in so many ways. So that often can just allow things to spiral out of control, and both feeling like they really have no control over what's happening. The teen can often feel very out of control in that situation because they don't have any structure for themselves. If you think back to the developmental thing, they're learning how to make decisions. They're learning how to make those judgment calls. And without boundaries around them, it's kind of a free-for-all that can lead to a big mess. But with a withdrawn or shy teen, that can be a way that works very well. They don't need as much structure in sort of that formal way. They often need encouragement in a structured way in terms of getting them out the door to try new things. But that style can match up in a little bit better way. A balanced style parent. And even tone, they often use considerable structure in how they make decisions, but they often are open to leaving decisions up to a teen. You wouldn't describe them as being overly firm or overly lax. And there's sort of firm points at different points along the thing, but they're not sort of overly restrictive in that kind of a way. And I think it's also important to say here that you're reading this and I'm suspecting some people are saying, oh yes, that's balanced, that's got to be me. That's the way I should be. And I don't think we need to be thinking about how you should be. I think we need to think about how we're matching up with the needs that the teen is presenting and how your own style fits with that. So I'm trying not to say one is better than the other in terms of approach. It's really a fit kind of question, I think. So for a wild teen, this may not be enough control. They may still be spinning out of control. For the withdrawn or the shy teen, they may continue to be fearful or anxious. They might feel lost. They need a little bit more of a different approach. But for the kind of teen that sort of fits middle of the road, typical kind of guy or a girl, that matches, and so that works. All of those parenting styles differ from, I don't care what you do. So I want to be clear about that. None of them are like, whatever, I'm totally not engaged with you. It's just a different style and a different approach. I was at another talk recently, and the woman that was giving the talk talked about ADD, and she used it as a different acronym for Adult Deficit Disorder, and I thought it was quite interesting to think about. And her argument was that for a lot of teens nowadays, there are not very many adults plugged into their lives. And the fewer adults that are plugged into teens' lives, the more likely they are to be falling apart because they just do not have the structure, they don't have the control, they don't have mentors. People are busy. We all have very, very busy lives, and I think sometimes it's really easy to underestimate how important being plugged into what's going on. And if it's not you that can meet the needs, who else is it in your broader community that can provide that kind of structure that will help your teen to feel a little bit more plugged in or mentored in a different kind of way? So that's something to think about. I'll leave that one with you, the ADD component. Cycles that families fall into. This is something that I hear a lot about. So someone might show up and say, my child or a teen does not listen to me whatsoever. That leads to yelling and anger in our house. It leads to punishment and reacting, which then leads to noncompliance. And it's this cycle that goes around and around and around and around, and how do you stop it? It can be a really, really tricky thing to break. But you see there's different points along that cycle of where you could change. And maybe one of the first ones to think about is the yelling and anger one. Or maybe it's the punishment and reacting. You've got to think about where in that cycle can you break it? Where do you have the power to make a difference in that? One approach that's been suggested of late for teens and kids that are presenting with more of a conduct, pushing the limits kind of style, and it can be used for other teens too, is a collaborative problem-solving approach. Often, as I said, suggested for kids that would be more explosive or non-compliant. Often in this style, the explosive behavior is viewed as a result of incompatibility between the characteristics of children and their adult caregivers, whoever they may be. And the kids are viewed as lagging in skills in the global domains of flexibility, adaptation, frustration tolerance, and problem solving. It goes back to the executive functioning that we were talking about before earlier, and the question of can you have deficits in one area and not in the other, and this would be picking up on that. 3 different approaches. Plan A, imposition of will. So this is something you must do. It's a non-negotiable. It's something that an adult would insist on intensively. Now, this could be a style that parents use across the board, or it could be a style that comes up sometimes. So this might be something that would be appropriate for a health matter. So it's not really a negotiable thing for you to decide whether you need to go to see the doctor for some reason or whatever. So the parents would be saying, no, this is an expectation. Plan B, solving a problem before it arises. The child and the parent's concerns are both heard and acknowledged. So this is something that is an important something, but there's some flexibility in how you manage it. Maybe it's not insisting right now that you have to take the garbage out, but you can finish your video game and then do something else, something that's a little bit more negotiable. And it could be bigger than that. Plan C is dropping or reducing the expectations. Either removing the expectation, or the adult is saying, you know what, that's a perfectly fine, legitimate question. Go ahead and do it because I'm supporting you along the way. In Plan B, and this is definitely a very brief summary, if you're interested, there's some references that I have for collaborative problem solving. But we're first talking about empathy plus reassurance. So I've noticed that you're not feeling very well lately, or I noticed that you're frustrated with your homework. What's up? Opening the dialogue. You want to get a very good idea of what is going on with that teen. What is that primary concern? So you're defining the problem, and then defining the problem from your perspective. Here's my concern. This is what the situation is. So you've understood clearly what the situation is with your teen, and now you're trying to convey to your teen what the problem is from your perspective. An invitation. So let's see if we can figure it out. And brainstorming possible solutions with the teen or the child taking the lead. The solution needs to be feasible and mutually satisfactory. So if you're interested in learning more about that, Green and Ablon 2006, Treating Explosive Kids is a great reference. I have it at the end if you're interested. It's an approach that many people have found successful with dealing with youth that do have this kind of explosive style. When we think back to the cycle that I was talking about in terms of the non-compliance, the arguing and the anger and the sort of whole negative attitude that can come across in a household, one of the things that I think is critical is that when you're beginning to make some changes, you really need to make some positive things happen in your environment. It's very hard to cash in on or make changes on a negative behavior unless you have enough positives in your bank, so to speak. So you want to know that you've got enough of a relationship going on with your adolescent in a positive sense that when you are going to make suggestions on how things could change, on negative behaviors that you want to have changed, that there's enough of a dialogue, enough of a positive kind of thing going on that can happen. That can be really important in able to shift what's going on at that point. Some ways to go about increasing positives. Giving praise. This may seem very basic, so we'll see how it goes, but how do I give a compliment? Notice the behavior or action and be specific. So, wow, I really like how you cleaned up the car. Wow, thanks for washing the car. Something very that describes the behavior so the child or the adolescent knows exactly what it is that you liked. Often a praise is very general. And one of my pet peeves is good boy or good girl. That tends to happen with the younger age ones, but it can also happen with adolescents. And it's not about who they are. It's about what they're doing at that point in time. So people are not evaluated that kind of way. We wouldn't say to another adult, oh, good adult. You just wouldn't do that. So why do we do that with people who are younger than us? It just doesn't fit. So really, we need to be describing what it is that you like. Don't negate the positive with a negative. So, thanks for taking out the garbage. Too bad you don't do it all the time. Right? Really nice compliment. Stop! You got to stop there. Don't take it away with the carrying on part there. I put here, nice to hope you have, welcome to the dinner table, hope you remembered your manners. It's really astonishing to me how so easy to fall into that. I can feel it in myself sometimes where you just want to put that little stop button on yourself. And especially when emotions are running high, and especially when you're trying to practice this. So if you've fallen into a routine where you're not doing this a lot in your home, this takes practice. And it's going to feel fake, and that's okay. Because in the beginning, it needs to be fake in order to become more of a habit. Keep it short and sweet. So again, you may get caught up into giving that initial nice compliment, nice praise, and then you just keep on going and going and going. For the adolescent that's distracted or not used to getting compliments, they miss the compliment that happened in the very beginning, even though you may have done that in a really nice way. It's gone. They're focused now on the fact that you're annoyed because you didn't pick something up somewhere along the line, right? But you gave them a praise. So this can actually go back and forth. You want to be keeping it short and sweet and moving on. Match your child's temperament. I can hear from parents sometimes say, my child does not take a compliment. Or teachers often will say that too. This child can't take a compliment. To me, that suggests that they need practice. So just like we have to practice giving compliments in a way that adolescents can take them, adolescents also need to practice being able to take a compliment. Adults need to be able to take a compliment too. That is a skill that many people cannot do. You know, when someone says, wow, you look great today, this is an ugly shirt and my hair looks bad. You know, that whole string of things that happens. You're also modeling to your adolescent around how you take a compliment. So maybe we can all practice tonight going home and giving compliments and taking compliments and see what happens. But I'm being very serious in that way. That some adolescents need compliments initially in a subtle kind of way because they're not used to getting them, but you're still dropping them there along the way so that they can pick them up. And some are more comfortable with getting them in a more overt way, so thinking about how they take those on. And then I just said repeat and increase in frequency. So the more you can do it, the more you're changing the dynamics in your house. Noticing positives. So it's easy for parents to fall into their daily routines. They kind of lose track of all the great things their teens are doing, and this requires a change in your mindset. Here's an experiment that you can try. Try for one day to put more energy into noticing the good things your teen is doing than the bad things. Okay? Just noticing the good things. It's hard, again, to do. Try it. Watch for the small things. They don't have to be huge things. Sometimes we're waiting for that really big grade to come home in order to give them a compliment. No, it could be like, wow, thanks for closing the dishwasher. I don't know. Start wherever you need to start in order to be able to build up the positives. Don't tell your teen at that day that you're doing it. So just try it as a subtle experiment and observe if anything happens. It may not, but you might be interested to see it. And then repeat and increase in frequency. One of the things that we've been doing in the setting where I work is focusing on gotchas. And I work with adolescents who have complex problems and typically have experienced a lot of challenging things in their lifestyle. So we, in an effort to sort of start switching and focusing on the positives, because we can get into a routine of being stuck on the negatives, have implemented gotchas, which is just giving out little paper things that say, wow, you were got doing something positive for somebody, for holding the door for somebody else. And I have been really impressed with how the teens, have bought into it. This is a really challenging group of adolescents. And how each week when we count them up, they're excited to see how many they have. We use them to earn pizza parties every 2 weeks. So those that have enough gotchas earn the pizza party, and we keep collecting them over the week so you never lose them. But they're tied into them. I had an adolescent just today say, I was at a meeting and I couldn't come to the Friday check-in, but I still have my gotchas and can I count them up? And I thought, that's really cool that he has bought into the positive nature of things. And I think it kind of challenges our assumption sometimes that adolescents will think that's dumb, that they won't care, and that it's kind of like really babyish. No, they're looking for the positive too, and you just need to figure out how it'll fit for them. Risk-taking versus safety. So, we're switching gears here. How comfortable is my teen in taking risks? And what is my teen's risky behavior trying to communicate to me? Here's a quote. Our children are telling us they need to experience some measure of risk in their lives. They need to feel the exhilaration of testing their limits. Here's a fruit basket. In it, I have a variety of fruits, and I've labeled them of different things. But I want you to think about them as being some behaviors that you may not be comfortable with, or you may be frustrated with, or you may want to change. And the tendency is to say, stop doing that. I don't want you to do that anymore. So you're trying to take away a behavior, some kind of risk-taking behavior. But in order to do that, you really need to put something back in there, or your fruit basket falls apart. There's not enough things in there. And whatever you're choosing to be the substitute, not you choosing, but whatever you're working with your team to find a substitute for, should be equally rewarding, bringing recognition and power. Often the risk-taking behaviors that they're engaged in bring for them recognition and power. And you need to think about what is going in there instead. The Remember says we have a limited repertoire of behaviors. So what I mean by that is that often when we're asking people to change something, to take something away, we are not giving them something to go in replace. And they may not even have within their range of behaviors something that would fit in there, and we need to think about what other options there are for them. So risk-taking substitutes, some examples of risky behavior: stealing, running away, engaging in risky sexual activity, drinking, drugs, driving recklessly. What, you say, can replace those? So let's think a little bit along those lines. Ask your teen, if you could do anything you wanted to do, what are you really interested in doing? Okay? So opening the dialogue, what are they really interested in doing? I like that picture. It kind of looks like you're going right into the sky. That's a risk-taking behavior. Have you ever tried to skateboard and do that? I mean, let's shift our mindset on what risk-taking behaviors can be. I didn't ask if you had a helmet on when I copied the picture. Keep an open mind and then ask. Okay, so we're creating dialogue here. Don't speak or criticize. Okay, so you're generating your brainstorming activities. Listen to what you're told. Don't speak or criticize. Okay, it's often a tendency to fall right back into that. You open the dialogue and then you shut it down by saying something that's not needed at that moment. Brainstorm. How can that need be met in a responsibility-seeking way? Okay, we're shifting from risk-taking behaviors to thinking about responsibility-seeking. Don't speak or criticize. I put that in there 3 times. It's not just by accident. I think it's a really important component when you're brainstorming. Risk-taking alternatives. Maybe they're interested in taking on a part-time job. That can be risk-taking for some youth. Volunteering. You'd be amazed at the youth, again in our program, that are thrilled to be volunteering in a variety of settings. Absolutely thrilled, and are dedicated to it and make it work for them. Maybe you're willing to negotiate around a curfew. Maybe they want to play in a band and you're, I don't know, afraid of the saxophone, whatever. Adventure sport pursuits, traveling, going somewhere on your own is a pretty exciting thing to be able to do. Funky haircuts, clothing choices, you need to really make it fit for your teen. It really has to be a fit question, and it's something that you need to develop with your teen around these things. But you need to think about what the alternatives are before you're asking them to stop doing what they're doing. Keeping connected. A concerned parent provides scaffolding for growth, not just a life jacket for safety. Okay, scaffolding being helping them to stand on the way, recognizing that risk-taking may be part of the responsibility-seeking that they're doing. Acceptance versus individuality. So, how comfortable is my teen in being her own person? Does my teen feel like I really get him? You know what I mean by get him? I'm seeing you, I'm understanding you, and I'm trying to really pay attention to what's going on for you. This is the standard features of an adolescent. Maybe, maybe not. But I just thought it was interesting to think about different components of of trying to be an individual. And I quote, "I love your spirit, but we have to work on your style." So I think that's fun too. Values. Adopted values being those values that teens are taking in from the people around them. They're in some ways trying them on for size. Often we think about values as being things that they're taking from the parents that are around them, but it can be from other caregivers, it could be from a mentor, it could be from a teacher, it could be from someone in their community, those values. And as they try them on for size, then they're developing their own personal values. When someone operates from their adopted values, you tend to be a little bit more uncomfortable with that because you're still not sure about them. When you're operating from your personal values, then you're hoping that the choices are reflecting your own personal decisions and the personal values make, and it's a much less stressful way to operate. So the values component of developing is really important, and it's also part of their individual identity as they go along that continuum. One more thing I want to say about values, if I can go back there, is that another thing I've always been impressed with around adolescence is how adolescents often have a very strong sense of identity around values. They often have very strong opinions around environmentalism, peace, And they can be sort of captured as being sort of the idealistic view of the world, but I think that energy and the spirit that goes along with that is something that we really need to capitalize on in so many ways and empower them around those things. And that could go back to finding risk-taking substitutes. Thinking about what their values are, what do they really care about, may help you understand that better. Staying connected. So open communication is necessary. You may not like what you hear, but you'd rather hear it from them. So again, that's, what are you telling me? What do I have to say? And doing a lot more listening. Ways to stay connected, just different ideas that I put out there, and I'd be interested to hear what other people may suggest. Family dinners. There's been lots of interesting research around the importance of family dinners, sitting down at the table, how often that does not happen nowadays. I know people have very hectic schedules, but research has shown that when you're able to schedule it in, when you make it work for your families, it's very highly predictive of resiliency for youth, feeling like they've got a space that people are hearing, and it's a great way to do it. Movie nights, going out somewhere, regular check-in times, playing board games. Again, something that often we think, oh, an adolescent would never want to play a board game. No, if you can put a competitive streak in it, they're all about it. Not necessarily, but that's what I find. And just other ideas. Gratitude. Our children are drowning in a sea of objects. I think that there's a tendency for us to think that they need more and more and more. And I would suggest that they need a lot more structure and they need a lot more connection, but I don't think they need more things. You are more important than things. So if we just review, we're going back, thinking about balance. How do we balance all those different things out? How do you think about each of those? And where does your teen fit on the continuums? Some take-home messages. Teens are like toddlers. Structure helps create feelings of being more secure and being more confident. I think structure is something that is often underestimated. Parenting fit. Match your parenting approach with your teen's temperament, focusing on the positives. And listening. Trying to listen more than you're talking. Reframe risk-taking. Notice and appreciate responsibility-seeking behaviors and focusing on substitute behaviors, not just removal of those behaviors. Connection is critical. I need to feel part of something that's bigger than just me. And I also need to feel connected to my family, whoever that may be. And families are certainly defined in very different ways now, but I need to be felt and understood by them, that they get who I am, and I think that's a really important piece. I'm leaving you with this thought. We cannot direct the wind, but we can adjust our sails. And I think that's something very important to keep in your mind as you're working with adolescents in particular. Here's some key references. Collaborative problem-solving approach. Adolescent Girls in Crisis is a new book that's out and has lots of interesting ideas. And Michael Unger has just recently released a book, I guess, in the spring called Too Safe for Their Own Good. He talks a lot about risk and responsibility seeking, and I would recommend that for people who are interested in knowing more about it. It's very easy to read and user-friendly.